Hello everyone, this is part 9 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto just took a few seconds to really enjoy the soft crunching under his feet. It was remarkable to think how similar snow was to sand in the way it blanketed everything it could. At the same time they were so different, while one was harsh and sometimes irritating, the other was soft, pure and... Naruto froze mid-step in the middle of his thoughts as he felt a cold wet mass strike the side of his face. He turned angrily in time to see three giggling shapes retreat into a nearby alleyway. He caught the tail of one of the young boy's scarf with his gaze as it whipped around the corner and sighed deeply. Normally he would have chased after the kids, returned their snowballs in an extremely unnecessary and exaggerated revenge. Luckily the serenity of the night and the utter tranquility of the soft snow-drizzled world around him had left him in a good mood. And he had somewhere to be. He continued on the path to the gates of the Inuzuka compound, muttering about Bratz and the inventor of the snowball who he wanted to both congratulate and throttle. He smiled as he walked past Ninken, happily rolling around in the snow trying to disturb it as much as possible, only ending up covering their coats with it. Some days they made it particularly difficult to remind himself these were animals trained to kill on command with their partners. He entered the main house of the complex, wiping the last of the snowball's essence off his neck and out of his shirt. He could have flared Kyuubi's chakra and evaporated the remains of the frozen ball, but he always felt like that was cheating. It also didn't help that every time he did so the Ninken would be put on edge for the rest of the day, severely annoying their handlers. Instead he just allowed the warmth of the house to get rid of the last of the dampness from his person. He looked around, still smiling as he observed the festively decorated home. While not the most modern depiction of Christmas, you could still tell that is what the household was celebrating. Wreaths of traditional plants like holly and ivy littered the walls while the enticing aroma of festive puddings drifted through the house. For a household of smell-sensitive shinobi, that was one of the best parts, and Naruto had to agree with them. While the concept of Christmas itself was quite alien and confusing to Naruto, he couldn't help but be caught up in everybody's good moods at this time of year. From what he knew, it was some kind of ancient religious tradition brought across from far-off Western lands and had quickly been accepted by the elemental nations. What was important to the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was the well-established tradition of gift-giving. Without snow, Christmas never had much impact in Wind Country, with residents barely taking notice of the baffling and somewhat pointless holiday. After all, it didn't really make much sense to have a day of festivities over a religion you took no part in, when at any minute you could be called on a mission that might threaten your life. Even so, now that he was in Konoha again, a big believer in Christmas festivities, he decided to fully immerse himself with the concept while he was here. This was the reason he had been wandering around since his daily training had finished, trying to find everybody and give them the gifts. The first person he found was Chum, happily eating in the kitchen with Kuromaru not too far away, equally indulging in some festive dog food. Chum looked up as Naruto entered, half-heartedly wiping food from her mouth with her sleeve. While a kind-hearted woman, one couldn't say Chum cared too much for manners. "Hi Mrs. Inuzuka." Chum smiled and wearily shook her head at the title. "What have I told you, pup? Just call me Chum." Naruto wasn't too sure about that. He wasn't really one for addressing adults by their first names unless they were his sensei. Even then he just gave them nicknames. He felt that it had been overtly kind for Chum to take him and his friends into their home, so he wanted to respect her. He instead decided to divert the topic of the conversation by bringing out a scroll from one of his many pockets and unsealing its contents. "Merry Christmas." He widened his smile as he held out the ball in front of him. While simple and rather plain, he had made sure it was toughened and sturdy. This was a ball that would last a great deal of time. Chum just took the palm-sized white ball and held it in front of her before her own feral smile graced her lips. She looked down at her faithful companion of over 15 years and tried to remember the last time she had simply gone outside and played fetch. It seemed like almost lifetimes ago, and the fond memories lightened her heart a little. "Thank you, Naruto, this is very kind." She did actually mean that. It was a surprisingly thoughtful gift for somebody who had only known her for a couple of weeks. Or it was a really lucky guess. Have you seen Tayuya or Gara? Chun was still looking at the ball when she shook her head. No, sorry, but they aren't in their rooms if that helps. I had Hana check on them a while ago. Naruto just shrugged. He had only just started to look after all. Thanks anyway. He was already walking out of the door by the time Chum even looked up from her gift, remembering the last person to get her a gift so thoughtful. All this time and Naruto had never even noticed the framed picture of a smiling red-haired woman and her spiky blonde-haired husband. Naruto was just glad to check a name off of his rather small list of people to give presents to. He made his way back out into the brisk night and stuck his hands into his pockets. Tayuya may have found his presence warming, but that didn't stop the young Jinchuriki from feeling the biting wind. He smiled again as he saw another name on his list walk by in the opposite direction. He didn't bother stopping to talk as he didn't want to keep Kiba busy, nor did he want to spend more time out in the cold than he had to. Hey Kiba. Merry Christmas. He had already pulled out the scroll and unsealed the gift by the time he called out. Kiba turned to look at the person who yelled at him, only to surprisingly catch the gift and see a mop of blonde hair disappear out of the compound's gates. He smiled before looking down at the gift, only for the grin to quickly mold into a frown. He stared down at the packet of dog biscuits before he let out a small chuckle, wearily shaking his head in a manner his mother had done only minutes before. Naruto took to the rooftops as he raced across town. He knew it had been over 7 years since anybody in this village had even seen him, but he still didn't want to take any chances. The less people that saw him, the better. The way he saw it, he was only here for another month, then he could get through the last stage of the exams and just go home. So he stuck to the shadows of the village, not that it was really necessary being night time. It didn't take him all that long to make it to the temporary accommodations that the non-Konoha Chunin finalists were staying in. Temari and Kankuro could have gone home after they failed the second test, but they chose to stay to cheer of their little brother and their pseudo-siblings in the last round. Tayuya would occasionally come here to talk to Temari, and Gara would likewise visit his siblings when he had some free time. As it was, he walked into Kankuro's room only to see the fledgling puppeteer fiddling with Crow, alone. Naruto's sigh brought him out of his concentrated bubble and he looked over, a little sheepish that he had been caught so engrossed in his work. He tidied up the spring-loaded trap he had been working on and swiveled in his seat. Hey Naruto, what's up? Naruto smiled. Trust Kankuro to be casual no matter what the situation was. Nothing much. You seen Gara or Tayuya? Kankuro shrugged and Naruto could tell he was itching to get back to his work. Sorry, they were here earlier but I don't know where they were going. Temari might know. Naruto nodded. That was his usual line to get people out of his hair so he could go back to his real friends. Naruto had never got puppetry. He always thought it left the user so open to attack if facing more than one opponent. He couldn't fault Kankuro though, the style had obviously worked for him so far, discounting whatever it was that cost them the second test. He was walking out of the room when he remembered the second reason he had come at all. Oh yeah, nearly forgot. He quickly unsealed Kankuro's present as the older boy swiveled on the chair again. Naruto carefully passed the palm-sized vial of deep purple liquid over to his pseudo-brother, taking extra care not to spill a single drop. New poison, Merry Christmas. Now when you usually give a teenager a vial of deadly incurable poison for Christmas, they might react with disdain, annoyance, or if you're lucky, indifference. Not Kankuro, he merely beamed like he'd gotten the largest pile of chocolate imaginable. Thanks Naruto. The other boy didn't get to hear the rest as he was already out the door and heading across the small hallway to Temari's room. He knocked this time, remembering the last time he barged into Temari's room with a visible gulp. He hadn't thanked Kyubi enough for his accelerated healing factor that day. Temari admitted him with a strangely muffled shout, and he quickly found out why when he came in only to see her hastily putting away some food in a drawer. She hated Konoha food, just preferring her more traditional desert cuisine. It had actually been rather amusing when she had come to him a few days before they left and gotten him to seal copious amounts of said food into a few scrolls for her. He also noticed that she had her violin in her lap, obviously having been practicing. Yet again, it was another reason for her and Tayuya to be so competitive in their respective musical fields. While he would admit that Temari's was just as good as Tayuya, he knew which one he would say if asked. He was just glad he hadn't been. What is it, squirt? He chuckled internally. Temari always came off so hardened, but he knew she was really soft on the inside. Sorry, speak up. I can't hear you. Most of the time. Hey Temari, you seen Gaara or Tayuya? She shook her head slowly. Nah, but they were in here about 20 minutes ago. A devious smile spread over her features. Why? You finally gonna make your move on the lucky little redhead. Naruto tried to scowl, but honestly he couldn't be mad at Temari right now, her father had just died after all. Funny Temari. No, I just wanted to give them their presents. His eyes shot open a little in realization that he had completely forgot once again. Before Temari could comment, he had the scroll out yet again and was unsealing its contents in seconds. When the smoke cleared, a massive gleaming sickle was in Naruto's outstretched hands. When Temari just stared at it, Naruto thought he would have to clarify. It's a new scythe for Kamatari. Again Temari just stared at the weapon blankly. Do you like it? That at least seemed to bring her out of it as she nodded lamely. Naruto simply smiled as he passed her the sickle, already heading out of the room before she recovered. Well, thanks for the information Temari, Merry Christmas. Up on the rooftops of the temporary accommodations building, Naruto was getting frustrated. He decided to track down his friends the old-fashioned way. He refamiliarized himself with their scents and went about discerning them from the surrounding aromas and smells that covered the village. Finally he picked up Gaara's distinctive sandy smell and he once again took off across the rooftops to reach his friend. What he found startled, confused, and amused the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Gaara sitting in a stand, eating ramen. He read the sign over the small, otherwise unnoticeable stand, Ichiraku's Ramen, and faintly remembered something about that name from his past. When it wouldn't quite take, he shrugged and sat down next to Gaara, not even startling the red-haired boy like he had been expecting Naruto all along. Hey Gaara, the other boy merely nodded, still engrossed in the steaming noodles he was slowly devouring. Seen Tayuya. Gaara nodded again and Naruto waited for him to finish his mouthful. She left, said she was going to go look for you. Naruto groaned deeply. He had spent this whole time looking for her when he could have just stayed at the Inuzuka compound and have her come to him. Well, at least he didn't forget to give Gaara his present, as he so self-congratulatory reminded himself as he pulled out the now almost exhausted scroll. Gaara watched him curiously, familiar with the concept of gift-giving on Christmas, just not used to it. Naruto, we haven't celebrated Christmas even a single time in the past 7 years. Why did you get me a gift? Naruto just shrugged while smiling. Why not? As he said it, the scroll burst into a small cloud of smoke, revealing a medium-sized cloth bag which Naruto happily handed over to Gaara. The one-tailed Jinchuriki peered inside, more than surprised by what he found inside. He poured out some of the gleaming dust onto his hand and curiously examined the shimmering particles. Gold dust. Naruto happily nodded before his smile turned a bit more melancholic. I knew you wanted to practice your dad's techniques, so he wasn't sure how to continue. The present had been planned before Gaara's father was killed, and now Naruto wasn't sure how Gaara would take it. He was relieved when Gaara simply poured the dust back into its bag and gave Naruto a small but genuine smile. There were definitely hints of sadness about his features, but in all he seemed grateful for the gift. Thank you Naruto, this is very kind. Naruto just startled his friend by wrapping him in a warm hug. Normally his sand would have intercepted such full-bodied contact, but it had lowered its defenses against Naruto a long time ago. Merry Christmas Gaara. He pulled away from his slightly shocked and slightly happy friend. I'm going to go find Tayuya, see you later. Gaara just nodded dumbly, still a little overwhelmed by the present from his oldest friend. 30 minutes later and Naruto was beginning to grow steadily more frustrated. He hadn't even caught a whiff of Tayuya as he jumped about the village. Gaara's scent was easily discernible from a crowd so far from the desert, whilst Tayuya's cinnamon smell was much harder to pick out. Eventually he found himself up on the Hokage monument on the scant chance that Tayuya had come up there to think or admire the view. In the end that was what he ended up doing, just sitting up there on the head of one of the most powerful shinobi to ever live, thinking. He thought back to some of his more cherished memories of him and Tayuya and Gaara. He thought ahead to the upcoming finals, his opponents and respective fighting styles. In the end he just idly mused on his life so far and smiled as he thought about the people that had managed to become so precious to him he would gladly fight to his last breath in order to protect them. He smelled her before he heard her, not even bothering to turn as she came over and sat down next to him, naturally sidling closer to him so she could lay her head down on his shoulder. Hey shithead, been looking all over the village for you. He chuckled lightly and she felt the vibrations through her contact with him. What's so funny? He didn't bother turning to answer, maintaining his gaze over the lit-up streets that stretched out below them both. I can say the same thing about you. She lifted her head up off his shoulder and looked at him with an inquisitive smile. How so? He turned to face her as well and she merely poked a solitary finger as she punctuated each of her words. Because, poke, I'm, poke, not, poke, poke, shithead. She finished with a satisfied grin that made Naruto forgive her for the poking instantly. He chuckled and she let out her own small laugh as she turned to him again. So why were you looking for me? Naruto smiled deviously and took out the scroll for hopefully the last time that night. He channeled chakra into the last of the seals and one bright white smoke cloud later he was happily holding out her presents. She took the pouch first, obviously a replacement for the red belt pouch she kept her flute in. Naruto wasn't audacious enough to try and get Tayuya a replacement flute. She loved it after all and he was the one who bought it for her in the first place. No amount of money can just up and replace that kind of sentimental value. Like its predecessor, the new pouch was red, only it was much darker, more akin to the color of her hair. Without replacing the flute itself, Naruto considered this the next best thing, and from the look in Tayuya's eye she appreciated the gift as much as he hoped she would. It was in good condition, brand new, something that her old pouch definitely could not say. Tayuya almost looked like she would tear up, but she held the back until she took the second gift on the scroll. It was simple, nothing noteworthy or remarkable that would make it stand out. Even so, as soon as Naruto saw it he knew it was almost made for Tayuya. Naruto was hardly the first person people went to for fashion advice, but he just knew that the simple black beanie would look good on Tayuya. She herself wasn't quite sure what to make of the hat. She had worn her bandana for as long as she remembered living in Suna. Tentatively almost, she whipped off her headgear and pulled the hat over her unruly hair. It fit perfectly, just resting above where her ears would be if you could see them underneath her vibrant crimson mop. She had to give Naruto the fact that this thing was damn comfortable, and from the grin he was giving her he had to at least think it looked good. Of course she would be the judge of that in the end when she had a chance to see it in a mirror, but for now it was warm and comfy and smelt a little bit like Naruto, so she kept it on. Thanks Naruto. Naruto was too shocked to even smile. Luckily Tayuya didn't see this as she turned her head away to look out over the village. Of course, as there almost always is with Tayuya, there was an ulterior motive to the movement. She is desperately trying to hide the blush that overcame her face over the realization that Naruto had made a genuinely nice and heartfelt gesture and she had nothing to give him in return. She was frantically searching through her head for what she could do in this situation. She didn't have a gift in return, not even one she could escape him for a while and get. All the stores would be closed by now. She needed something cheap, maybe even free, that she could just give him and get this over with. Unfortunately nothing came to mind quickly. What do friends even get one another on Christmas? Or what do girls give guys? It's alright if you didn't get me anything, Tayuya. That isn't really the point. Tayuya wanted to round on him angrily. She hated how damn perceptive he could be sometimes. Naruto looked like he was about to continue the thought and unwittingly make her feel even guiltier. Instead she did something that she hoped would shut him up and solve her problem at the same time. Naruto really hadn't expected anything in return for any of his gifts, so there was all the more surprise when he felt something soft press up against his lips briefly before pulling away. He just looked in shock at Tayuya, who looked back at him, seemingly in the same shock that he was. Tayuya. Red invaded her cheeks as he spoke and she forced herself to look away before Naruto saw any more. Naruto continued to stare at the side of her face, eyes a little unfocused as his brain redirected all resources in an attempt to work out what had just happened. It was Tayuya who spoke first, a hushed, shy tone that Naruto thought he would never hear from her lips, not in his wildest of imaginings. Merry Christmas, Naruto. Before he could reply she was stood up and had jumped off the monument. His eyes followed her until she was out of sight, still unable to move or speak as his brain overloaded slightly. Merry Christmas, Tayuya. Tayuya was up early. That alone was enough to give her the kind of air that makes people go out of their way to avoid her. She loved her sleep, always lying in until the last possible minute that she could scrounge. This was almost in direct contrast to many of the kunoichi in Konoha who needed to get up early to perfect their looks. Tayuya used to sneer at girls like that in Suna, unfit to become kunoichi at all if they were more concerned with their appearance than their skills in combat. Why was she up early? Naruto. It always came back to that irritating, knuckle-headed, infectiously happy blonde idiot. That wasn't the full extent of words that Tayuya could use to describe her friend, but it was a decent microcosm. She just couldn't face him right now. Every time she saw him since that godforsaken kiss on the Hokage monument, her cheeks would flare red like she was trying to impersonate a tomato. Instead, she was breaking her own rule about sleeping in so that she could beat her friend to the rise and do absolutely nothing. There was a reason she didn't get up in the mornings, they were just so useless to her. She enjoyed training as much as the next shinobi, but it always felt so utterly pointless in the morning when your eyes hurt to look at the sky. So now she was traipsing around the village with her head hanging low, looking out for anything that might catch her interest and take her mind off the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. That was how she found herself standing right outside Ichiraku's ramen, staring up at the sign for a good 2 minutes until the girl working behind the counter noticed her. Hello. Could I help you? Tayuya looked around with unfocused eyes until she spotted the thin brunette. Uncharacteristically, she smiled weakly, a little embarrassed at being caught gawking at nothing in particular. She ducked under the flaps that separated the small stand from the busy streets and sat down on one of the stools. Hi, it was a start, she guessed. It actually surprised her a little. Normally she wasn't even that good at talking to strangers without some kind of barb in the words. Even so, there was just something about the kindly girl behind the counter that sucked any of the potential venom from her words. There was nothing particularly special about her. Simple long brown hair tied up with a cloth and a typical waitress outfit, a white blouse with a blue apron. It was more her demeanor. She had a naturally kindly face with a smile that, while well rehearsed and worn, was no less comforting and genuine. Her eyes also spoke of innocence and kindness, obviously having never seen any true hardship in her life like she, Naruto, or Gaara had. Even so, there was just something not quite visible about her that told of understanding and compassion. For somebody used to the more jaded side of life with bandits and people that would stab you in the back, it was unsettling for Tayuya. Could I get you anything? Even her voice was soft with just the faintest hint of natural humor. This was somebody you couldn't find a reason to dislike. Well, what have you fucking got? Not that Tayuya wouldn't give it a good shot. The waitress, ever versed in people's mannerisms, didn't even flinch from the language. She merely maintained her warm smile. I would recommend the miso ramen, since it's our specialty. Tayuya just nodded tiredly as the girl sent the order back to the elderly man in the kitchen, who she quickly gleaned was her father. So I notice you aren't getting the diet ramen. The voice didn't come from the waitress, it came from behind Tayuya, making her wonder who had the balls, or lack thereof, seeing as the voice was decidedly feminine, to judge her. She turned on the chair to see the platinum blonde girl that she vaguely remembered from the Chunin exam's preliminary matches. Yeah, what of it, Twiggy? Tayuya just gave her nickname as the first thing that came to mind. For a kunoichi, the girl was startlingly thin. Strangely enough, the strange Konoha nin seemed to take the comment as a compliment and sat down in the stool next to Tayuya with a smug smile. Aren't you watching your figure? Tayuya narrowed her eyes. That was an all too strange comment from a ninja. Figure? What the hell are you talking about? I train every day for at least 4 fucking hours. Why the hell would I need to watch what I eat? The blonde seemed to be put off by the retort, apparently thinking over the answer but not finding it to her liking if her brief shake of the head was anything to go on. Isn't there a boy you like? Now Tayuya was seriously put off. Who was this girl and why the hell did she care about this crap? What the fuck have boys got to do with anything? The other girl seemed just as put off by that answer as Tayuya had by the question. Her eyes went wide as if Tayuya was speaking some kind of abhorrent blasphemy. Are you saying there are no boys that you like? Tayuya really wanted to escape right now. Not only were these questions getting on her nerves, they were beginning to get embarrassing. Of course she knew what the other girl meant when she said, like, but Tayuya hoped playing innocent would get her to just leave her alone. Of course, my 2 best friends are guys. The blonde seemed somewhat placated by that, even though she was a little wary of the fact that the girl seemed to have no friends that were girls. Well, that explains your appearance. Okay. That was the final straw. Tayuya was just about to rearrange the blonde girl's oh so precious face, and she would have if the waitress didn't come back with her ramen. She decided it would be better for everybody, herself included, if she just ignored the blonde girl and her incessant questions. I'm Ino, by the way. What's your name? Tayuya just grunted between mouthfuls, hoping that Ino would get the message and leave. No such luck. So what are the guys like in the sand village? I bet they're really tanned, aren't they? Tayuya narrowed her eyes again, still not bothering to turn and face the other girl. It's kind of rude to not talk when somebody's speaking to you. Tayuya only laughed mid-bite and managed a muffled, aha. By now Ino looked about ready to leave, much to Tayuya's relief. However, when the redhead finished her meal in a very Naruto-esque fashion, the other girl gained a devilish smile. Well, if there aren't any boys that you like, then allow me to introduce you to the only boy you'll ever like. Tayuya only managed to furrow her brow in a questioning manner before she was practically dragged out of the ramen stand. She only just managed to chuck the money to cover the meal at the surprised waitress before she was round the corner and out of sight. Now that she had her bearings, she wrenched her arm out of the other girl's grasp, noting that it didn't take much effort on her part as Ino wasn't all that physically strong. What the fuck are you doing? Ino just smiled at her stupidly, her mind obviously elsewhere. Come on, I'm going to take you to Sasuke. Tayuya tried to back away, but Ino once again took her arm. I don't give a shit about SA's gay. I just want to go train. Again Ino didn't even seem to hear her. Yeah, he's mostly over by the training grounds. She sighed dreamily. He's so committed as a shinobi. Tayuya just mumbled something under her breath about how committed this girl should be with a weak-ass grip like this. Even so, she just decided to go with it. She was heading towards the training grounds anyway, and it wasn't like she had something better to do. However, that didn't mean she was going to allow herself to be dragged around by a kunoichi half her weight, and from the sound of things half her IQ too. She once again wrenched her arm out of Ino's hardly vice-like grip and walked at a fairly sedate pace behind her. Ino seemed annoyed that the girl wasn't ecstatic about seeing Sasuke, but she was at least following now, so she didn't have to keep pulling her around. She found it a little odd that the flaming red-haired girl was much heavier than herself, yet at the same time her figure was still quite trim. She wondered if the girl was right about doing all that training. She didn't look particularly muscular, but she was obviously strong. So what about your friends? Tayuya just looked at her in a way that very clearly said, what about them? Ino just rolled her eyes and moved closer before conspiratorially whispering, what are they like? Tayuya stopped still on the path, glaring at the blonde before her who just ignored the heated look. That blonde kid you're with was pretty cute. Nothing on Sasuke of course, but I guess you have to take what you can get. Tayuya found herself becoming strangely heated hearing this strange girl talk about Naruto in that way. What was even stranger was the feeling she received when Ino compared him to some other boy. She kept up her glare the rest of the way to the training grounds, completely ignoring every other question Ino shot her way. The blonde didn't actually think much of it. She was obviously the type who just enjoyed the sound of her own voice. They eventually reached the appropriate training ground, even though with every step Tayuya was regretting not running away more and more. They emerged into a relatively large clearing with 3 wooden posts driven into the ground off to one side. It was bordered on one side by trees and on the other by a large, crystal clear lake. It was ideal for training purposes due to its inclusion of all the possible elements: water in the lake, earth beneath their feet, wind all around them, and fire. Well, fire came from pure chakra manipulation, so that could be practiced anywhere. There he is, isn't he dreamy? Tayuya just looked vaguely annoyed that the blonde had once again decided to interrupt her thoughts. However, when she looked in the direction the girl was offhandedly pointing, she noticed the black-haired kid that defeated Kiba in the preliminaries. He was currently engaged in a rather heated spar with his sensei, the tall, silver-haired scarecrow that had sealed her curse mark. Even thinking about it made her subconsciously reach back to rub the spot it was now ingrained on. What? The kid with the duck's ass for a haircut? Ino looked around, completely appalled by the way Tayuya had described the boy she had a crush on. What are you talking about? Sasuke's hair does not look like a duck's, that. Tayuya grinned. She was glad that she was finally the one annoying the other. Oh sure, look, you just need the right angle. She quickly whipped behind Ino, grabbing the other girl's arms and reaching around her to make a camera-like symbol with her hands, focused on Sasuke. See, look, there's the feathers sticking up. She angled the shot around some more, and that's the ass. Ino finally wriggled out of the stronger girl's hold and turned to look at her angrily, desperately trying to cover up the fact that she had actually seen what Tayuya meant. Yeah, well, that Naruto guy's hair looks like, quote. Tayuya cocked an eyebrow, wondering why the girl would think she cared if Naruto's hair looked like anything at all. For that matter, she wondered why Ino cared what she thought of Sasuke's hair. shouldn't the fact that there wasn't another girl vying for his attention be a good thing? When Ino couldn't come up with anything, partly due to the fact that she had actually been admiring the shaggy and wild look of Naruto's hair in the preliminaries, her whole body seemed to slump. What's so great about this fucking Sasuke guy anyway? Ino looked like she was ready to rattle of an entire list and then some, so quickly Tayuya raised her arm and dismissed any more conversation. You know what? I couldn't give a flying fuck. Ino still seemed determined to prove that her Sasuke was the greatest, and Tayuya could already see her mouth opening to do just that. Before she could, however, no doubt leading to Tayuya kicking her across the clearing into the lake, everybody in the vicinity heard an enormous crash coming from further into the forest. It was loud enough to catch the attention of the two sparring shinobi in the middle of the field, who looked around in surprise. Sasuke only seemed to notice at that moment the two newcomers at the edge of the training ground. He was used to girls like Ino coming to watch him train, but the red-haired girl was new. He sighed deeply, thinking it was another annoying fangirl. When he looked closer, he realized she was one of the ones at the preliminaries, the one that was beaten by Lee. He had seen what she was trying to do, scope out her opponent with taijutsu before falling into her preferred fighting style. It was only unfortunate it was Rock Lee she was facing, or the tactic may have worked in her favor. As it was, it left him not knowing her abilities or skill level. He didn't like not knowing these things. He walked over to them, completely ignoring the large crash that had diverted his attention their way in the first place. You're not another fangirl, are you? He said it with an annoyed sneer, which made Tayuya want to laugh out loud. Instead, she settled on her own sneer of derision. Yeah, you wish, duck boy. He seemed momentarily confused by the comment, especially when he noticed Ino stifling a small giggle before she turned to Tayuya in badly acted annoyance. At that moment, Tayuya couldn't really have cared less about the annoying Uchiha in front of her. She was much more curious about what made the loud noise. At that moment, Kakashi decided to suddenly appear before the genin, startling all three, even if two hid it better than the other. You should be nicer, Sasuke. This was the girl who saved you in the Forest of Death. Ino suddenly looked across at Tayuya in what could only be described as a perfect mix of awe and utter jealousy. Sasuke took another appraising look at the girl, noticing the sealed mark on her neck that could have very well been on his own without her intervention. Hemph, thanks then. It was said fairly apathetically, out of formality more than anything else, but it only doubled the jealous look Ino was shooting at her. Tayuya just shrugged and began walking away, much to the surprise of the three gathered. Hey, where are you going? It was Ino who called out, so Tayuya completely ignored the girl as she strode off in the direction she heard the noise coming from. Ino furtively glanced between the red-haired girl and her crush that had decided to go back to training after the momentary disturbance. Knowing by now that Sasuke wouldn't give her the time of day until his training was over, and even then he might still ignore her, she took off after the interesting girl who was somehow immune to Sasuke's appeal. Hey, where are you going? We could have watched Sasuke training for a while. Even though Tayuya had drawn a pretty good picture of what this girl was like by now, she still shot a disbelieving look behind her. I'm a ninja. Why the hell would I want to do that when I could just fucking train myself? Thankfully for Tayuya, that shut Ino up for a while as she wrestled with the answer. They walked on in relative silence, drawing closer to the origin of the strange noises that reverberated throughout the forest. Finally, she could see what looked like a clearing up ahead and jogged over to where the trees ended. All right, come at me with everything you've got. She groaned as the familiar voice rang out across the training ground. Immediately she felt like slinking away before Naruto noticed her if he hadn't already. Luckily, he seemed focused on his training as he faced off against three of his shadow clones. She tried to walk away, but by that time Ino had caught up to her and was curiously poking her head through into the clearing to see what was making Tayuya so obviously uncomfortable. Naruto was standing on top of the river with three shadow clones, all in different taijutsu stances. His jacket was off to one side so that it wouldn't get wet, which left him in just his black pants and a navy shirt that clung to his damp body, showing off his muscles. He had also removed his headband so it lay on top of his jacket, leaving his wild hair to freely fall across his forehead, partially obscuring his vision. He did this to give him the most disadvantages possible against the clones to make the training that much harder. Ino couldn't stop the blush that rushed across her cheeks as she watched Naruto fighting himself across the water in perfectly trained attacks that viciously fought back the clones despite the numerical superiority. When one clone puffed out of existence thanks to too many solid blows, Naruto just made another, constantly maintaining the 3 enemies that came at him. It was an intensive chakra-exhausting training method that helped him refine his taijutsu style. What Ino was focused on was the way that his tight t-shirt clung to his body and the way his muscles flexed with every punch or kick. She was captivated by the supposedly foreign boy's startling blue eyes. Right now they had a hardened edge thanks to their focus on the fight at hand. The strange whisker-like marks on his cheeks were cute in the way they made him unique. She excitedly turned around to face Tayuya, who was just now beginning to sneak away from the scene while Ino was captivated. "That's your teammate." Tayuya just brought a finger up to her lips and shot the girl an annoyed look. "Shut up, he's got hearing like a fucking bat." Ino completely disregarded the other girl, and the huge smile plastered over her face just told her she wasn't done with the questions. Tayuya groaned again, but quietly so as not to alert Naruto to her presence. The last thing she needed right now was an awkward conversation with her friend in front of this annoying girl. "He's cute. You have to tell me about him." Tayuya snarled and began walking off in the opposite direction while Ino rushed after her, the same puppy-like smile on her features. Naruto thought it was the strangest thing. He was in the middle of training, fighting off a few of his clones, and he thought he had smelled Tayuya and some other unknown person. The distraction had caused him to lower his guard, and one of the clones got a powerful blow in, almost knocking him into the water. He quickly rejoined the fight, but by that time her scent had gone. He shrugged it off as the unfamiliar forest playing tricks on him. Despite the intensity of his training, Naruto's thoughts were elsewhere. Surprisingly, they weren't on Tayuya, despite the girl being the center of his focus for the past few days. He felt as though she had been avoiding him recently, and every time he tried to talk with her she would run off saying she had training to do. He would grumble about it, but in truth he had a lot of his own training to do in preparation for the Chunin exam finals. That was what occupied his thoughts as he dodged yet another sweeping blow from a clone he had dubbed Clone A. Mainly he thought about his first fight with Neji. Right now he was doing his more generic fitness and skill sharpening exercises, but sooner or later he would have to do some more specific training. The main area of concern was Neji's gentle fist style of fighting. He knew only one person who could help him with that. With a sigh he dispelled all his clones and gathered up all his gear, electing to leave his headband off for the moment as it tended to get a bit sweaty if he left it on all day. He hopped through the village, always careful to keep off the beaten track by sticking to alleys and rooftops. He knew there was no real concern to be this cautious, but he couldn't help it. Even though he could now easily protect himself, it would bring back too many memories. Soon he was in front of the large gates of the Hyuga compound. He remembered how he knew where it was with a large grin. Hopefully the Hyugas wouldn't though. Originally the prank had just been to spread the Hyugas' laundry all across the village in easy-to-reach places, no real harm done. It wasn't his fault that some pervert had taken it upon themselves to go around taking some of the more unmentionable items. With only a momentary hesitation, Naruto knocked on the vast gate, only for it to be immediately opened by a tall, thin man with the characteristic eyes that marked him a Hyuga. Yes. Naruto scratched his head. He had hoped for a little more time to come up with a more eloquent way stating why he was there. "Hi, can I talk to Hinata?" He mentally shrugged. It sounded alright to him. The older man scrutinized him for a moment, thankfully without the Byakugan active. Eventually his gaze softened and he nodded before leading Naruto through the winding compound out into a large courtyard. Naruto smiled as he saw Hinata going through an excessively complicated kata with a younger girl with straight brown hair as the target. Hinata noticed Naruto as soon as he came into the courtyard, and deviating from the standard kata she quickly incapacitated the younger girl. Hanabi cried out in annoyance at the dirty trick, but quietened down when she too noticed the newcomer. Hinata curtly walked over to him with a small smile. "Hello Naruto." He gave his own smile and waved in greeting. "Hey Hinata, I was wondering if I could get your help." She raised an eyebrow at that but nodded with a small smile that was steadily growing. "My first fight in the finals is with Neji, so I figured you'd be the best person to come to about advice regarding his style." She nodded slowly and Naruto didn't notice as her smile briefly diminished in size. "Yes, I suppose you're right. However, without an extremely intensive course into our style, which I wouldn't be able to give you anyway, I'm not sure how I can help you." Naruto frowned at that. He hadn't expected him to outright teach him the style, but he still wanted some help. I don't know, is there some kind of way to block the strikes?" Hinata gave a small, tinkling laugh that eased some of Naruto's frustration. Naruto, you're asking me to give away my family's style and its secrets. He smiled sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head. When she said it that way, then the request did sound a bit stupid. Oh, right. She laughed again, causing Naruto to smile more out of necessity than amusement. Sorry, but I can't help you, Naruto, as much as I want to see Neji beaten in the final. She smirked at the thought, but don't worry, I'm sure you'll beat him anyway. Naruto nodded, already making a move to turn and leave, but he stopped, remembering something that had been nagging at him for a while. Oh yeah, Hinata, what was all that crap Neji was spouting when he beat you? Isn't he your family? Hinata immediately went quiet at that, the smile vanishing off her face before the last word was out of her mouth. Oh sorry, I didn't mean to say something rude. He could tell that the subject was obviously troubling the young Hyuga heiress, so he decided to drop it. Never mind, I'll just go. See you around, Hinata. She didn't answer him as he left, so he hurriedly made his way out of the compound. Boy, that was weird. Yeah, you're telling me. Naruto nearly jumped in the middle of the street as Kyuubi's voice rumbled through his head. Hey, I told you to stop surprising me like that. She just chuckled lightly. Sure. And babies will start growing on trees. Naruto didn't have a comeback for that, partly because he was embarrassed about where babies did in fact come from, of which he had no clue. Oh well, you see, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, they hold their hands together, squeeze their eyes closed really tight and make a wish. Then after appeasing Kami with a ritual sacrifice of a newborn goat, a baby appears. Naruto gave the laughing fox an internal scowl, if such a thing was possible. Ha ha, very funny. He only felt her nod in his head. Yeah, I thought so too. He bit back his next retort, now actually wondering where babies did in fact come from. Perhaps he would have to take Hana up on that offer she made him. However, right now training was more on the forefront of his mind. Oh well, in that case I figured I would tell you that I can unseal your tenketsu if the Hyuga seals them with those magic fingers of his. Ha, what are you talking about? He heard a sigh from inside his head, which made him scowl. Every time Kyuubi sighed, it meant she was silently thinking he was being an idiot. Not every time. Anyway, I can force my chakra through your tenketsu if they get sealed, which will reopen them. I can only do that once though, after that it's all down to you. Naruto gave her a mental nod so as to not freak out any passing civilian who might just think he was crazy. It was useful information to know, and it would certainly surprise Neji if it ever came to pass. Of course, this was merely a backup plan or a what-if scenario, but the information was appreciated nevertheless. As he was walking, he spotted Tayuya going down the street in front of him with a blonde-haired girl trailing behind her. He smiled to himself. It was good that she was making friends. He was so worried that she wouldn't talk to anybody but him and Gaara this entire time. Why won't you leave me alone? Tayuya was at her wit's end. She was so close to just turning around and kicking this girl across the village. In fact, so far it had been an amazing show of restraint on her part due to her not wanting to cause some kind of international incident. Because you haven't told me everything yet. In truth, Tayuya hadn't told Ino anything, but that didn't stop the girl from digging. Pretty soon she felt like she might just tell the girl anything she wanted to hear so she would piss off and leave her alone, exactly as Ino planned. Ura. Tayuya picked up the pace only for Ino to match it. Soon she was just going to sprint. Naruto watched the two leave still with a smile. At least she was talking to somebody, even if it wasn't him. They seemed to be heading in the direction of the hot springs, and if Naruto had to admit it, that sounded like a really good idea right now. He was still pretty worked up from his exercise and hadn't warmed down properly, so his muscles were quite tense. A good long soak would do him some good right now, not to mention it would be relaxing. So 10 minutes later he was emerging from the springs building with only a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked out over the steaming waters before him with a satisfied smile, reassuring himself that this had been a good idea. He made his way quickly over to the only unoccupied spring and slid in with a very audible sigh of pleasure. Immediately the warm waters leached the very pains out of his skin and muscles, leaving him feeling like a cloud. His very good mood was ruined by a persistent giggling sound coming from somewhere over towards the back of the bathing area. Naruto tried to ignore it, but as it carried on he slowly gained a small tick mark on his forehead. Finally snapping out of irritation, he pulled himself out of the water, this time with a very different sigh, and wrapped the towel around his waist again. With his wet feet slapping against the stone slabs of the bathing area, Naruto made his way over to the source of the irritating giggling. What he saw both perplexed and annoyed him. There was an old white-haired man giggling incessantly as he peered through a hole in the wall as he occasionally looked away and wrote things in his small notebook. With a gulp and no small amount of embarrassment, Naruto realized the wall was the divider between the male and female baths. His embarrassment gave way to anger as he realized that Tayuya might be on the other side of the wall. Hey you pervert, get away from there. The old man peeping on the women's side of the hot springs immediately froze in place, cringing forward ever so slightly. He turned, expecting a seething woman that would no doubt want to kick him as hard as they could across the village. This was just paranoia, of course. If he had actually thought about it, then he would have disregarded such an idiotic notion. Firstly, there couldn't have been a woman on this side of the springs in the first place, and secondly, the voice was far too masculine. Instead, it was with great relief that he turned only to see a 14-year-old kid with spiky blonde hair eerily reminiscent of. Hey, I told you to stop peeping, you pervert. Naruto finally got a good look at the older man as he turned. He was surprisingly large for his size. Intrinsically, thanks to years of training to recognize such things, Naruto immediately knew that it was muscle, not fat. The way he held himself, despite his previous cowardly posture, spoke of power and expectations of the inherent respect that came along with it. However, more surprising than that to Naruto was the fact that, after a good look at the man's face, he actually recognized the man. How could he not? After all, he was the author of Naruto's all-time favorite series. Oh hey, you're Jiraiya of the Sannin, the man beamed, obviously extremely happy at being recognized. Yeah, I recognize you from the author shot at the end of the book. The man's eyes grew even wider and his smile more radiant as he looked down at one of his loyal readers. Huh, figures a guy who writes books like that would be some kind of super pervert. Before Naruto even fully realized what was happening, he found himself enveloped in one of the largest and most bone-crunching hugs he could remember. I have found him. I have found the person who truly understands me. Jiraiya pulled out of the hug to stare at Naruto with watery eyes and the same beaming grin. Naruto just tried to wriggle out of the awkward grasp while an abnormally large sweat drop hung from his head. It dawned on him that he was still wearing little more than a bath towel around his midsection, and he increased his struggles tenfold. It was in vain though. The old man's vice-like grip was impenetrable, like his arms were made of actual steel. Gah! Get off me, you old perv. Jiraiya quickly got off of the younger boy, but only because he noticed that people were starting to stare in the direction. Outwardly, he was still beaming like a child who worked out how to get into the cookie jar. Kid, you're one in a million. Maybe I should make you my student. No, better yet my apprentice. No wait, even better my protege. Naruto just widened his eyes and started to take slow but deliberate steps away from the eccentric and possibly crazy Sannin. Suddenly another thought struck Naruto as he backed away from Jiraiya. Hey wait, you're a Sannin, right? Finally the older man was knocked out of his little fantasy world and he curtly nodded to Naruto, still with that idiotic smirk. That's right, kid. You have the privilege of looking at the one and only Toad Sage, Jiraiya of the Sannin. Naruto could have sworn he heard fireworks after the man announced himself, but he quickly shook his head of it. Right. Jiraiya's face fell a bit at the slightly dismissive and unimpressed tone in Naruto's voice. So that means you know Orochimaru, right? Suddenly Jiraiya was all business as his demeanor immediately shifted to a more professional tone. Naruto was genuinely surprised, as he wouldn't have thought this old perv had a professional bone in his body. Why are you asking about my former teammate? He said the word, former, with no small amount of spite, and Naruto contemplated whether or not bringing the obviously touchy subject up had been a good idea. He gulped down his anxiety and plowed on in a very traditional Naruto-esque way. He killed Gaara's father, so I want to put a kunai between his shoulder blades. Jiraiya scrutinized the boy before him with an incredibly stern and piercing gaze before his eyes finally softened and he let out a small chuckle. Hey, join the ever-increasing club, kid. Naruto narrowed his eyes and sighed. So you have no idea where he is? It was said hopefully, despite Naruto already knowing the answer. Jiraiya just shook his head in response and Naruto felt his mood worsen even further. And to think that hot springs were supposed to be relaxing. Now that the old Sannin had no useful information for him, Naruto had returned to the uncomfortable state he was in before. Oh well, all right then. With that, Naruto just turned on his heel and started making his way back through the springs. Hey wait up, brat. Naruto couldn't help but wince. The insult didn't exactly help make him want to comply with the pervert's wishes, so he kept walking. Jiraiya overtook him, turning to face him and simultaneously blocking Naruto's way out of the springs. I said wait up. Naruto shrugged innocently with a plainly disinterested look on his face. Yeah, I heard you, but if you can't train me then I have no real interest. Jiraiya's eyes seemed to widen to almost impossible sizes as he stared down at Naruto, who once again grew uncomfortable under the strange gaze. Are you kidding me, kid? I'm Jiraiya of the legendary Sannin. I've been and fought in all 5 hidden villages, visited every land in the elemental nations and faced enemies that would make you cower in fear. He looked a bit more smug now, however Naruto managed to maintain his emotionless mask and reply in a completely deadpan voice. Doesn't make you a good teacher. Jiraiya managed to accumulate a large drop on the side of his head that may or may not have been condensation from the springs. Yeah, well kid, I can show you a thing or two. His cocky, overconfident persona was now back in place as he took purposeful strides towards the unoccupied spring Naruto had been sitting in minutes ago. When he reached the edge of the water he just kept going, purposefully striding out until he was in the center of the water. See, how's that for a... Sorry, were you saying something? Jiraiya turned around, agitated at the boy's offhanded tone, however he was briefly put off when he saw what Naruto was doing. He too was on the surface of the water, except he was standing on top of a kunai, which was point down atop the water's surface. Naruto just lazily yawned as Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched and a few hot spring patrons clapped at the impressive display. Oh. Well, it seems you have chakra control exercises down at least. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly, believing the man to have completely wasted his time so far. At least he had stopped the man from peeking, even if he was probably going to go straight back to it as soon as he left. Like I said, if you aren't going to teach me anything, he didn't bother to finish the sentence as he hopped off the kunai onto stone floor of the bathing area and quickly hurried towards the changing rooms. He was fully dressed and on his way out by the time Jiraiya snapped out of his grumbling trance and caught up. Well kid, you mentioned a Gaara before. That wouldn't happen to be Gaara no Subaku, son of the late Kazekage, would it? Naruto didn't bother turning to face the man, but he did quirk an eyebrow at the mention of his friend. I ask because you seem to know so much about me and yet I know so little about you. Naruto stopped walking in the middle of the street to look at Jiraiya without even attempting to hide his bemusement. Really? Then guess all that stuff I read about your supposedly vast spy network was exaggerated then. Naruto shrugged in an amused fashion and carried on, a smile now on his face. Orochimaru wasn't the only Sannin that Naruto had decided to research. He was a little disappointed when Jiraiya didn't even seem fazed and matched Naruto step for step. Maybe you're right, Naruto. The younger boy smirked, knowing that the Sannin was baiting him. He hadn't given his name after all. You know, I'm almost a little flattered that whoever your parents were, they named you after the title character of my story. Naruto's breath hitched a little, but he quickly covered it up with a cough that seemed to go unnoticed by his unwanted companion. Whoever my parents were. Another hole in the network. Jiraiya just shrugged nonchalantly, and despite their awkward and strange initial encounter, Naruto actually found himself warming up to the older man. It was nice to have someone to banter with who wouldn't use a curse word every other sentence. So kid, where you headed? A remarkably perverted grin erupted on Jiraiya's face and Naruto sighed, not liking where this was going. You meeting up with a lady friend perchance? Naruto grimaced but didn't say anything, which only caused Jiraiya's grin to spread to almost comical proportions as he quickly lost himself in whatever sick fantasy was going through his mind. While curious, Naruto found himself desperately not wanting to know what the man was thinking about, especially if it involved him. After about 30 minutes of walking in highly awkward silence, Naruto finally arrived at the Inuzuka compound. It was late and he was tired, and surprisingly Jiraiya just kept walking after Naruto stopped, apparently still lost in his perverted dreamland. Naruto just counted his blessings as the perverted Sannin walked off with a goofy grin while he slipped into the compound via the gate. He sighed an enormous breath he didn't even realize he had been holding as he leaned against the large wooden gate. Naruto walked across the grounds of the compound, unsure of what to do with himself. It was late, but not enough that he felt the need to sleep just yet. He could train, but last time he did that he disturbed Hana, and he didn't want to do that to any other passing Inuzuka. Now that he thought about it, he wasn't even sure why he had come back to the compound. He had simply followed his feet on instinct. His thoughts trailed back to Hana and her offer earlier in the week. He reddened as he thought about it, but if she was here in the compound, then this was probably a good time. He lazily altered his course to head for the veterinary practice tucked away in the corner of the estate. He knew this was going to be even more awkward and uncomfortable than talking to Jiraiya, but he grit his teeth and kept walking. His last thought before he entered was on what Tayuya might be doing right about now. She was hunkered over in the darkest corner of the alley, using the shadows as a shroud to conceal herself. She wouldn't call it cowering herself, but in essence it was what she was doing as she sat curled up in her own arms. She gripped her legs fiercely, nearly drawing blood with how hard her nails pressed her skin. It was all she could do to stop herself rocking backwards and forwards like a PTSD patient. It isn't human. Nothing could follow me that fast and break all those genjutsus. She tried to take her mind off it by thinking how she got here. They were running across rooftops, although sprinting would have been more accurate, and Tayuya was weaving in and out of every passage she could find in an attempt to lose her pursuer. She gained a small amount of ground and ducked into a nearby alleyway, forming a very familiar crossed seal with her hands as she did so. The shadow clone raced off in the opposite direction, and soon after it, the platinum blonde blur. She sighed in relief from her position on the cold, slightly damp floor. At least that should take care of her problem for the foreseeable future. When she saw Naruto tonight, she was going to have to thank him for teaching her that jutsu. She stood up and brushed herself off, not really bothered by the small amount of dirt on her clothing, but she knew the smell would annoy Naruto later. She stopped herself on that thought. She had always been rather considerate about Naruto's heightened senses, but he had never gone out of her way to avoid making him uncomfortable. In fact, most of the time the exact opposite was true in most other situations. It only struck her as odd because this was the first time it had happened. She managed to brush it off with the rest of the dirt on her clothes and walked out of the alley, straight into the smiling face of Wanino Yamanaka. "There you are, Tayuya." Naruto heard the scream that echoed throughout the village, and he also faintly noticed that the voice was somewhat familiar. However, in his current state he barely cared. His face was a shade of red that would make a tomato blush, and he would still be redder. His eyes were so wide that he couldn't actually physically close them, and the only thing that kept his jaw from simply dropping to the ground was the constraints of biology. He walked in a very stiff and robotic manner towards his accommodations, his mind far gone from what his eyes were seeing as he walked. Everything that Hana had told him rushed through his mind. Unfortunately, so did the visual aids she used, in horrifically vivid detail. Naruto couldn't stop his eye twitching as he thought about the mechanics of what she had been trying to explain. Naruto now firmly wished he had ignored his own curiosity and taken his ignorance to the grave. He flopped down on the bed, only offhandedly noticing that Tayuya wasn't there, which was probably for the best considering what he now knew. Sleeping in the same bed as his female friend now took on a whole new perspective in his mind as the connotations of such actions were revealed to him. He was actually just glad that Hana didn't need to resort to using a friend, who apparently would have been more than happy to give some kind of demonstration. To say Naruto was shell-shocked by the entire affair was definitely an understatement. With an exasperated sigh, he flopped his head down on the mattress, hoping that sleep would just claim him so he could put off dealing with this until the morning. Luckily, the entire ordeal had been exhausted, and not soon after that the sweet and merciful embrace of sleep took him. Naruto sighed as he woke up for the fourth time in a row without Tayuya's vibrant locks in his face. Her waking up early normally would have concerned him. It told him something was very wrong. However, all he could do was sigh and be mildly annoyed, mostly because he knew the reason was him. He wasn't entirely sure why she was avoiding him, but he had a pretty strong idea it had something to do with that kiss up on the Hokage monument. He wanted to talk to Tayuya about it, but she had been avoiding him ever since. It really didn't help that he found it nigh on impossible to locate her scent in the veritable hive of activity that was Konoha. His specific training had hit a dead end with Hinata, so on that end he was stuck. The only thing he could do concerning the finals was train the skills he already had. Then again, Jiraiya really was a Sannin. It couldn't have hurt too much to get one or two techniques from the man. He merely shrugged. That too was a lost cause, as he had no idea where the man was, so it was pointless thinking about it. He got up and showered, figuring he would go out and find Gaara. Sparring with him always cheered him up. He looked back on the previous day's events. Now with some hindsight, he was actually taking in the knowledge Hana had given him. He might have overreacted just a little. She had explained that it was all perfectly natural, so really he had nothing to worry about. Somehow that didn't quite settle his nerves on the whole affair with Tayuya, but he put it to the back of his mind for now. He quickly got dressed and ran out of the compound, hoping that he wouldn't run into Hana. He didn't think any differently of her now, except as a female, but he figured it would be slightly awkward to talk right now. Once out of the compound, he took to the rooftops. Normally he would head straight for the training grounds, but Gaara's scent was definitely somewhere in the village. He was just lucky he didn't have the same issues with the Leaf Village that Naruto did. He could walk around in public. The only strange looks he would receive were due to the enormous gourd constantly strapped to his back. Naruto quickly caught up with the sand wielder and gulped when he realized who he was walking with. He settled into a brisk walk next to his friends, him on one side of Gaara and Tayuya on the other. Hey Gaara, Tayuya. Gaara nodded and Tayuya just grunted something inaudible. Awkward silence settled over the three until surprisingly Gaara decided to break the ice. So Naruto, have you found any way to combat the Hyuga style? Naruto hung his head a little. No, I can't find anybody to teach me about it. Tayuya scoffed loudly from her position on the other side of Gaara. Well it's not like they're gonna just teach you all their weaknesses. Naruto hung his head lower, still seeing as that was in essence what Hinata had told him. However, he smiled anyway, glad that Tayuya didn't seem to be avoiding him anymore. So what are you going to do? Naruto just looked up at Gaara with a feral gleam and a broad grin. You know me, I'll just wing it. Tayuya scoffed again but kept her opinion to herself this time. So Gaara, want to go spar? The smaller boy seemed pleased with the idea, but a different thought seemed to come to mind and he shook his head. I'm afraid I can't. I have my own training to do. When he saw Naruto's exaggerated puppy dog look, he gave a small smirk. There will be plenty of time for that in the last fight of the finals. Naruto nodded happily at that, even though it might have made him seem slightly cocky about his chances of reaching the last fight. We could spar. Naruto looked over at Tayuya a little surprised. In fact, the girl seemed surprised herself that she had even made the comment. It was more out of instinct in these situations, but Naruto wasn't going to give her the chance to take back the offer. Great. Before Tayuya could properly react or even fight back, Naruto had her arm and had thrown her onto his back in a makeshift piggyback. Gaara watched as they were there 1 second and gone the next, only the slight fluttering of loose papers on the street telling him they had moved. Gaara smirked, knowing what Tayuya's reaction would be when they came to a stop. He looked around a moment to check nobody else had seen the speedy departure before heading off to a nearby, but deserted training ground to perfect the technique he had been working on. Tayuya got off of Naruto's back a little shakily. Her hair was slightly less orderly than it had been when they had left and had even managed to gain a few leafy ornaments during transit. She took a moment to allow the world to stop wobbling quite as much before she rounded on Naruto angrily. You know I hate it when you do that, shithead. Naruto just nodded while shrugging carelessly. Yeah, but you also say you fight better when you're mad. Tayuya was about to retort, but she had no good comeback for that. Instead, her eyes narrowed evilly while a small smirk briefly danced across her features. She reached behind her and drew back out her flute from its latest pouch almost reverently before setting it against her lips. Naruto didn't seem in the least bit fazed. Come on Tayuya, you know genjutsus don't affect me in combat. Tayuya's evil smile returned at these words like she had been waiting for them. Oh, who said anything about a genjutsu? She blew delicately on the flute with a very specific sequence of air holes held down and the effect was immediate. To any normal listener no sound emerged from the thin instrument, but to Naruto, his senses were flooded by deafening white noise that immediately had him on the ground, clutching the sides of his head in pain. After seeing Naruto writhe around for a solid 30 seconds, Tayuya finally stopped the torture and allowed Naruto to shakily get to his feet, much in the same way that she had done prior. He glared at Tayuya while he wiggled a finger in his ear, a look of pain still evident on his face while he waited for the ringing to stop. That wasn't funny, Tayuya, she smiled, a genuine happy smile despite his rather heated gaze. I beg to differ, shithead, pretty hilarious actually. His eyes softened and his own smile managed to worm its way onto his face. He had missed this kind of interaction in the last few days, even though he could probably do without the ear-splitting headache. Fine, are we going to fight properly now? Tayuya just looked amused, crossing her arms over her chest and leaning back slightly as she looked at Naruto with a grin. Naruto couldn't help but notice the placement of her arms as his eyes drifted down before he forcefully returned them to her face. What the hell are you talking about? I won. Naruto looked playfully hurt. That's it. That was hardly a fight, Tayuya. She smiled again and disinterestedly looked down at her nails, ignoring Naruto. Yeah, you're right. Next time come at me with more of a challenge. It was said playfully, but when she looked up, Naruto was gone. Without showing too much emotion, she looked around, a little worried by the sudden disappearance. Just as suddenly as he had vanished, Tayuya felt a presence barrel into her from behind, and soon she was on the ground, straddled by Naruto, as he held her arms down, grinning wildly. Okay, how's this then, Tayuya-chan? She glared at him for the name and struggled underneath him, but he was a lot stronger than she was and his grip wouldn't budge. Eventually she let her head drop to the ground with an irritated grunt, and Naruto stood off of her, still smiling manically. He offered her his hand, and after a few moments of Tayuya's version of pouting, which included trying to kick Naruto in a very special area, she accepted it. Fair enough, shithead. I guess we're even today. He smiled happily, and she couldn't help but be caught up in one of those infectious moods of his. For the briefest of moments she forgot why she had been avoiding him all this time. Of course, at that moment the light streaming through the treetops caught him, lighting up his hair like a radiant inferno, and she remembered, looking awkwardly down at the ground. Naruto sensed the sudden shift in her behavior, and not wanting her to start avoiding him again, he quickly tried to find the root of the problem. Hey Tayuya, these last couple of days. Naruto. My protege. Naruto groaned as the highly over-enthusiastic voice cut through the clearing like a very unwelcome knife. Tayuya just looked around in confusion for the owner of the voice, who quickly made themselves known. This time Naruto knew he was using fireworks. There was no other explanation for the bright lights swirling around the eccentric man as he entered the clearing. Who the fuck are you? It was at that point that Jiraiya took notice of Tayuya, vanishing before appearing next to her, making both of the younger shinobi's eyes widen. Ah, such foul language from such a pretty young woman. Tayuya's cheeks immediately flared red at the compliment before her eyes turned murderous, and she lashed out at the man. He swiftly ducked under the blow and took a few steps away on his ridiculous getter sandals, which seemed highly impractical for a ninja. The fuck you say to me, you ass-wiping pedophile? Jiraiya actually blanched at the insult this time, a large drop of sweat hanging on both his and Naruto's head. The older man gulped before nervously turning his attention to Naruto. I see you keep interesting company, my young apprentice. Both Naruto and Tayuya narrowed their eyes at the veiled insult, while Naruto was beginning to grow annoyed. Stop calling me that. I'm not your protege. Jiraiya put on a look of mock hurt, sticking out his bottom lip ever so slightly. Is that any way to treat your sensei? Naruto glared again. You're not my sensei either. This time Jiraiya pretended to be horrendously shocked in a very over-the-top and comical way. After everything I've taught you. It was Naruto's turn to blanch at the older man, wondering in what direction the loony bin this guy escaped from was. What the hell have you taught me? Jiraiya just snickered. What else? The art of love through my brilliant and priceless novels. Tayuya stared at the man incredulously. You're the pervert that wrote Make Out Paradise. As she said it, she drew out the aforementioned book and stared at it with no small amount of disbelief. Jiraiya, on the other hand, couldn't be more thrilled as he looked at the girl holding his book. Another of my loyal readers. He quickly turned to Naruto. This one is a keeper, boy, never let her go. Naruto was still speechless from the whole display, not sure what to make of it. Figures. Tayuya was about to tuck the book back into a pouch, but not before Jiraiya grabbed it, quickly opened it to the back and signed the cover. Tayuya accepted the newly signed book a little cautiously, now very wary of this man's speed. Oi shithead, just who is this fucker? Naruto sighed. He had been about to sneak away while the other two were distracted, but Tayuya called him before he could even move a step. That's Jiraiya, one of the Sannin. Jiraiya quickly cut in, not one to let somebody else announce him. That would be legendary Sannin. That's right, you're looking at the one, the only, Toad Sage Jiraiya. Breaker of hearts and wooer of women, author extraordinaire and handsome devil if I do say so myself. Jiraiya was too caught up in his announcement and missed Tayuya quickly add in. Because nobody else will. Naruto snickered at this, once again out of the notice of the carried away Sannin. Naruto motioned with his head to Tayuya and she quickly nodded. Seconds later the clearing was down to shinobi. As Jiraiya finally came out of his rant, he looked around with a cheesy grin only for it to drop when he realized the other two had abandoned him. He scowled while looking for the direction they headed in. Not finding it, his grimace quickly became a perverted smirk. The two lovebirds probably wanted some privacy. He walked off giggling, perverted thoughts in control of his mind for the moment. Tayuya and Naruto came to a rest in a different training ground, panting from the exertion of running so fast. Well, Tayuya was at least. She sometimes really hated Naruto's seemingly undrainable energy, except of course when it saved her ass on missions, not that she would ever admit she needed him. She smiled as she thought about how easily they ditched the old pervert. One glance at Naruto showed that he was amused by it as well. For a Sannin he sure was a sucker. Naruto only nodded, smirking at Jiraiya's expense. Yeah, he's a massive pervert too. You know how I met him. Tayuya waited for him to continue as he seemed to chuckle in his head about something, although his cheeks turned a little red. I caught him peeping into the lady's hot springs. Tayuya's eyes opened wide in newly fanned anger towards the self-proclaimed super pervert. That old bastard, next time I see him I'm going to rip his fucking nuts off. See if he's got anything to gawk at after that. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the slightly impassioned speech but winced at her threat. What man wouldn't have after all? Even so, Naruto was fairly certain Tayuya wouldn't be able to follow through on such a threat. Jiraiya was a Sannin for a reason after all, and that title wasn't given to just anyone. However, he wisely decided to keep that little opinion to himself. He looked across at Tayuya, seeing her smile, thinking about hurting Jiraiya made him happy. It was like the kiss never happened. Hey Tayuya. She nodded absent-mindedly, lost in her violent fantasies. I'm sorry. She looked across at him a little strangely, trying to work out what he was talking about, so he clarified. Sorry about whatever I did that made you avoid me all this time. Tayuya's eyes widened and her eyebrow raised itself in shock. He actually thinks he did something. You moron, she shocked him in turn by punching him lightly on the shoulder, not as hard as she did when actually angry with him. You didn't do anything. He looked at her. This time he was the one who was confused, and it showed, making her sigh deeply. It doesn't matter, shithead. Let's just forget it, okay? Not one to miss out on a chance like this, he quickly and excitedly nodded before surprising the redhead by pulling her into a brief but warm hug. She was so shocked she didn't have a chance to struggle before he let her go, still grinning that everything could just go back to the way it was. However, inside both of them they knew deep down that something had changed. While neither knew what they knew, it wouldn't be so simple for things to go back to normal. She gave him a mock scowl that looked convincing enough in payback for the hug before recomposing herself. Yeah, well, you still got fuck tons of training to do, so might as well get started. He just nodded happily, and once again she couldn't help but smile along with him. It was like the last 7 years never happened and they were those two young runaways on the road again. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.